Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we transform complex research and, well, spiritual guidance into clear, usable knowledge.
It's good to be back.
Today, we are tackling one of the most persistent and I think confusing challenges in the human experience, which is the path of growth.
And we are taking a pretty dramatic detour from, the modern landscape of instant breakthroughs and five-step formulas.
Oh yeah, no more perpetual positive vibes.
Not today. Today, we are heading straight into what you can really only describe as the spiritual desert.
Exactly. I mean, when we talk about personal or spiritual growth, the conventional wisdom, the comfortable narrative, it says it should feel good, right? It should be this continuous uphill climb that's paved with light and joy and emotional fulfillment. We chase the feeling of progress.
But our source material today just flips that entire assumption on its head. I mean, what if those periods of emptiness, of confusion, the intense difficulty, or that crushing sensation of spiritual dryness, what if those aren't signs of failure or regression or that you've been abandoned? What if they're actually a divinely tailored, precise tool that's designed for profound, deep-seated purification?
And that is the core paradox we are extracting today. We are diving into Molinos' seminal guidance, specifically drawing on the desert path to divine purity.
Yeah, the focus is going to be on chapters 6 through 8, which they really lay out a highly challenging but ultimately freeing roadmap for the dedicated seeker.
So what's our mission today?
Our mission is to thoroughly extract the key insights on why the painful path, the path that feels spiritually unproductive or even, totally barren, is, in Molinos' view, the most productive path to achieving that fundamental internal character change.
Okay, so to frame this whole discussion, Molinos starts by positing two great classes of spiritual experiences that believers run into.
That's right.
You have the pleasant experiences, which are fundamentally about gaining the believer's attention and loyalty.
And then you have the difficult experiences.
Right, and those are all about purifying the believer's inner life.
This dichotomy, gaining versus purifying, that's the lens. It's the lens through which we have to analyze everything that comes next, especially the role of darkness and dryness.
And before we go further, we should probably clarify a really critical term here.
Yes, the natural life.
The natural life. When Molinos discusses this, the yogi, what exactly is he referring to?
It's so important to get this right. He is not talking about the body or nature or anything like that. He's referring to the untransformed, self-centered ego.
Okay.
It's the part of us that's governed by our sensory perceptions, our emotional highs and lows, and our rational understanding that hasn't yet been submitted or purified.
So it's the me that's running the show by default.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that is the very entity that this desert path is designed to confront and ultimately to dismantle.
All right, let's unpack this core dichotomy in detail, starting with that initial stage. Molinos calls it the stage of the child and the senses.
The spiritual nursery.
The spiritual nursery, I like that. This is what most people initially associate with a fresh spiritual awakening or, a conversion.
Indeed. This initial stage involves what the source material calls type 1, the attractive experience.
Attractive.
Yeah, and they're described in very sensory terms. Tender, delightful, filled with an overflowing, palpable love. They're often highly engaging, whether that's through intense feelings of joy or intellectual excitement about new ideas, or even, physical sensations during prayer.
So these experiences are basically a massive welcoming signpost. And Molinos is really clear about their purpose. He says these are given to obtain us. Exactly. They are designed to woo the person, to draw them in with sweetness and immediate positive reinforcement.
And they serve a vital, necessary function. I mean, let's be honest, the spiritual life can feel overwhelming or abstract or distant.
True.
So these initial sensory experiences, they act like training wheels. Or maybe a better analogy is spiritual honey.
Oh.
They condition the learner to associate the path with pleasure and fulfillment. They just make that initial commitment appealing.
But, and there's always a but, if they are so positive, where does the warning come in?
The warning is critical because it highlights the transition point that Molinos says most believers completely miss.
That's it.
Because these experiences are so enjoyable, so tied to our immediate external feelings and senses, the believer can become attracted to or even obsessed with the sensations themselves.
Yeah.
Yes. They become obsessed with the feelings rather than the ultimate source of those feelings or the actual work of purification.
So they mistake the training wheels for the journey's goal.
That is a powerful distinction. The emotional high becomes the target. And then what happens? If they stop feeling that high, they immediately assume they've failed.
Or that God has withdrawn.
Exactly. They become dependent on the feeling to sustain their pursuit. But Molinos says true growth requires maturity. It requires growing beyond the need for these constant spiritual treats.
And that's when you have to enter the second phase.
The strong adult and the will. And this requires shifting from a dependence on what you feel to a dependence on what you will.
And that transition brings us to type 2, the purifying experience. This is the difficult territory.
This is the desert.
It's the experience that actively works against the comfort of that natural life we just defined. It's confounding, it is dry, solitary, lonely.
Babe. When this arrives, it feels like the whole spiritual journey has just stopped cold or even gone into reverse.
And the purpose here shifts completely. It reflects the difference between, say, a child learning to walk and an adult training for a marathon.
Okay, so if the first type was given to obtain us,
the second type is given to make us pure.
It moves from attraction to transformation.
And what does this purification demand? I mean, how does the adult believer handle this new barren terrain?
It demands a complete surrender of your dependence on the senses. The adult has to stop paying attention to external feelings, the joy, the tears, the excitement, as indicators of closeness.
So you're taking your eyes off the emotional speedometer.
Exactly. This advanced stage requires us to begin to recognize the struggle with our ingrained self-will, the safe will, and to intentionally achieve harmony with divine will by submitting our own.
This is where true volition is required then. Not just happy submission that flows naturally from a good feeling.
That's the crux of it.
We are no longer motivated by the reward, but by the determined choice to obey, regardless of the emotional climate.
And Molinos is absolutely unequivocal on this point. He states that this state, this entry into the purificatory experience, is the state everyone must enter if they seek profound internal change.
So it's not an optional extra, it's not for the spiritual elite.
No, it is the necessary path of maturity.
So the initial spiritual joy it's just scaffolding.
Just scaffolding.
The purifying struggle, the dryness, the loneliness, that is the actual foundation being laid.
Right. It forces the believer off the superficial level of emotional reaction and into the deeper work of aligning the will and the character. If you only chase the joy, you never develop the internal spiritual muscle you need for true resilience.
Which brings us right to the desert path itself, and this idea of dryness as a tool.
This section is so crucial because Molinos completely redefines the experience of dryness. It's not divine neglect, it's a divine instrument.
He insists on it.
Yeah.
He says this dry experience, the dio, is a beneficial tool used specifically for the believer's advancement.
It seems so counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Completely. We equate spiritual health with abundance, with emotional fertility, but Molinos is saying that barrenness is an active, productive state.
So what's actually happening during this period of dryness?
It's defined by an intentional, systematic stripping away. During this time, the feeling derived from the 5 senses, the sensory enjoyment of prayer or worship or fellowship, is deliberately removed.
Molinos' phrase is that the 5 senses, the hu pitches, are stripped away.
And with that, all the outward signs of progress or piety just seem to vanish. Those intensely moving spiritual moments, gone.
So if your measure of closeness was the intensity of your feeling, your dashboard is suddenly reading 0.
And this is why his guidance is so relevant to the modern learner who feels that sense of losing momentum.
Oh, absolutely. They start thinking, I must be backsliding, I must be doing something wrong because I don't feel anything anymore. The absence of feeling is interpreted as a failure of effort.
So the dryness presents a crucial choice. This is the test.
It's a fork in the road.
You can either abandon your practice and stop moving forward because you believe the lack of feeling means the effort is useless and the relationship is dead.
Or you persevere. And Molinos argues that this perseverance is the very mechanism that leads the believer to a state where they no longer require external feelings or sensory feedback to attain divine solace. The source of comfort shifts. It moves from the external stimulus, like a rousing song or a powerful sermon, to an internal, unshakable assurance that's based purely on faith and the stubborn choice of the will.
That is the ultimate goal of independence, then. Spiritual maturity means your stability is internal, not reliant on external emotional conditions.
But why must this be done without our clear understanding? The text mentions that fascinating concept, the veil of ignorance.
Here's the heavy curtain.
Yes, the spiritual veil. We often feel separated, as if this heavy curtain is lying between us and the powerful work being done inside. We don't get a clear readout of our purification process.
Which begs the question, if God is doing such great work on our character, why not give us the clarity? Why hide the progress?
Molinos explains that this lack of clarity is actually a critical protection mechanism. He calls it the anti-pride mechanism.
The anti-pride mechanism.
He argues that if we were always clearly aware of the profound structural work being done on our spirit, if we could see the transformation happening in real time or measure our growing virtue, we would immediately become very proud.
We'd start celebrating our own spiritual success. Look how far I've come. I must be exceptionally devoted.
Exactly. And Molinos states that that belief, that immediate surge of self-congratulation and self-centered pride, would lead to an immediate downfall.
The ego would hijack the process.
The ego, the natural life, would hijack the spiritual success and claim it for itself. So the veil of ignorance is necessary for humility. It forces us to trust the invisible work without the immediate, satisfying reassurance of feeling the progress. It's a guardrail against spiritual narcissism.
That makes profound sense in a modern context where we are obsessed with immediate feedback loops.
Progress bars, tracking apps, likes on social media.
Right. We are conditioned to think if we can't measure it, it isn't real. And Molinos is saying the most real structural growth is precisely what you can't measure.
And that's the modern application. If our spiritual understanding has been relying on external feelings or relying too heavily on the external environment, the happy atmosphere, the community validation, the rousing music, all of that has to be systematically removed for true internal growth to continue.
And the vehicle for that removal is the desert.
The dry, desolate places. God uses these dry experiences to accomplish this essential, necessary step of weaning us off our sensory dependence.
So it's a form of spiritual surgery.
I think that's the best way to see it. And like most surgery, it's performed under a form of anesthesia. The anesthesia of feeling nothing, so the natural life doesn't fight back or try to claim the procedure's success.
So the dryness is actually the sign that the divine is dealing with your dependency, not that the divine has departed.
Precisely. If you are experiencing this lack of feeling, it's a signal that you're being moved off the scaffolding and onto the true foundation, where obedience is chosen by the will, not compelled by emotion.
Okay, now we get to the payoff. And this is the section we need to spend some serious time on, because this is the practical evidence that the dryness is actually working.
Right, the fruit.
Molinos uses this beautiful metaphor of the farmer. The farmer plants the seed in one season, tends the seemingly barren ground during the dry months, and only harvests in another season.
And the rewards of that dry season are often only visible much, much later in his determined time, as the text says.
That time lag is intentionally challenging, isn't it? Because we are just wired for immediate feedback.
We are, but the source assures us that this hidden work builds an unbidden resilience. God grants strength against temptation when we least expect it. A sudden, surprising capacity for resistance that emerged from the foundation laid in the dryness.
The primary immediate reward for just stubbornly seeking the Lord through this dryness is what Molinos calls the grace of endurance.
And this isn't just grit. It's not just pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's the divine capacity to just keep showing up, even when it feels pointless, and you are getting zero sensory reward.
And that endurance, in this context, is the fertile soil.
It is, and from this soil, a comprehensive list of character changes springs forth. We often measure spiritual growth in external acts, but Molinos details 13 profound internal transformations that result from faithfully enduring the dry season.
Let's go through these structural changes, because this gives the listener, insight into the profound internal architecture you're building when you feel like you're achieving nothing at all.
Okay, first, we find a deep-seated aversion to worldliness. An internal weariness of worldly things emerges.
And this isn't a forced legalistic avoidance.
Not at all. It's an organic shift where the allure of the temporal starts to naturally fade, simply because the spirit has been exposed to something purer.
And this leads directly to the second fruit, new desires.
Yes. The desires of the old life, they just lose their chemical power. They're replaced by a new thirst for the Lord.
It's like a detox, really. The junk food of the soul just stops tasting good.
It's a great analogy. Third, we see a seeking the neglected. You start concentrating on and longing for spiritual things that were previously dull or uninteresting.
Like quiet contemplation, or the nuance of doctrine, or the slow act of devotion.
Exactly. These become compelling where once they were just tedious.
The fourth is a vital internal safeguard, the internal warning system.
This one's fascinating. When you're approaching the edge of committing a sin, you become aware of this deep-seated, subtle internal warning. And this system, which Molinos says has a tangible strength, it keeps you from actually crossing the line almost without conscious effort.
It's conscious refinement at work.
It is, which leads to the fifth. We gain detachment, worldly allurements are severed. The hooks of the world-attractive speech, temptations leading you away, they lose their hold simply because your internal center of gravity has shifted.
Sixth, we find conscious refinement in the subtle acts. Molinos notes that actions that previously caused no moral discomfort are now automatically stopped.
The baseline standard of internal purity has quietly elevated itself. The believer might only notice the change when they automatically refuse a former behavior without even thinking about it.
Seventh, the spirit becomes hypersensitive.
Extremely. Even minor mistakes, light faults, cut, now result in internal correction and great distress.
And to be clear, this isn't morbid guilt.
No, it's the purified spirit immediately recoiling from misalignment, like a perfectly tuned instrument hitting a wrong note.
Eighth, the ultimate mark of the strong adult, a willingness to suffer.
A willingness to suffer for God and obey. His will gradually arises. This is crucial because it means the pursuit is no longer contingent on comfort. Obedience is chosen regardless of personal cost.
Ninth, the shift to a true tendency toward holiness.
This involves an intense inward focus. The battle is no longer external. It's about quietly dealing with the old self, the hue and the private desires, and all those inner enemies that reside in the heart.
Okay, now we arrive at number 10. And this is probably the most controversial fruit, the one Molinos calls the linchpin of the entire process.
Self-loathing.
Self-loathing, learning to recognize and despise one's natural life. For a modern listener, this just sounds dangerous. We're told to love ourselves. What exactly does he mean by despising the natural life?
This is where we have to be extremely precise. Molinos is not advocating for unhealthy psychological self-criticism or self-punishment or clinical depression.
That's a critical distinction.
He is talking about hating the natural life, that ego-driven part we defined at the very beginning. He's discussing the surgical separation from the self that demands attention and self-gratification and operates purely on its own desires, the sat.
So it's not hating the person you are. It's recognizing the inherent destructive self-centeredness of the natural ego that constantly tries to hijack the spiritual process.
That is it, exactly. It's the moment of profound recognition where you see my natural, unpurified inclinations are what keep me separate from genuine depth.
And the text emphasizes that without this revelation, without recognizing and actively despising the inherent self-centeredness of one's natural life, all other efforts deemed spiritual, no matter how joyous or active they are
futile.
That is a staggering claim. You can have all the emotional joy, you could perform all the rituals, but if you still love the self-centered ego, Molinos says the entire endeavor is meaningless.
The success of the dry season is measured not in feelings or skills, but in a profound shift in self-perception and a rejection of the natural dominating ego.
Wow. Okay, let's get to the last three. Number 11.
11th is true reverence. Experiencing genuine honor for God that surpasses all created things. When the self is decentered and the ego steps back, the divine can finally be truly centered and honored without that constant competition from self-interest.
12th, we get steadfast presence.
A fixed heart that cannot permit itself to leave God's presence. Abandoning him becomes the greatest pain and loss. This is the ultimate victory over the dry season, where leaving seemed like the easiest option. Now, the will has locked onto the divine.
And finally, the 13th fruit.
Internal peace. And this isn't peace found in comfortable circumstances. It's a deep feeling of peace that comes from detachment from all things and a calm assurance of his sovereignty over everything.
That structural growth is just massive. It really feels like we're talking about a complete spiritual rewiring.
We are. But Molinos offers that important reminder. These characteristics are like new shoots on a small tree.
Right. You won't perceive them immediately during prayer. They won't show up on your emotional speedometer.
They will manifest later in His determined time, in your actions, your reactions, your core choices. And the immediate danger for the listener is seeing that small tree as barren and just giving up the practice because they confuse lack of feeling with lack of growth.
So the goal is to trust the silent subsurface work. The invisible progress is the true progress.
It is.
And that leads us directly to the question of what we are truly trying to harvest in the first place. Are we chasing feelings or are we chasing reality?
And Molinos identifies two fundamentally different paths of pursuit in the spiritual life, which mirror the two types of experience we talked about.
One is true, relying on the spirit, and the other is dependent on external feelings and sensation.
Let's start by analyzing that faulty pursuit path in detail, the one dependent on external sensation.
Okay.
This path relies so heavily on rational or emotional stimulation. People chasing this are seeking intense joy or crying or excitement or these profound emotional breakthroughs.
This creates a dangerous illusion, then.
A very dangerous illusion. Believers mistakenly think these happy, emotionally charged relationships are definitive signs of divine pleasure or some kind of special intimacy.
So they spend their spiritual lives chasing that fleeting emotional high, convinced that the intensity of their feeling equates to the depth of their connection.
Molinos' reality check here is just uncompromising. He calls this delusional. He says, this excitement is merely natural here. It's emotional or intellectual stimulation. It is simply a reflection of the natural life, the ego and its censors, that we were just told must be despised and overcome.
So if your pursuit is constantly demanding a feel-good response, you're prioritizing the ego's comfort over the spirit's purification.
And that type of feeling-based pursuit is a practical obstacle to inward advancement because it keeps the individual tethered to the surface. It's like a person who only goes to the gym when they get that instant rush of endorphins.
They quit when the hard, consistent work begins.
Exactly. So the true pursuit must necessarily move beyond feeling-based reliance and enter a real relationship rooted in the deepest self.
And this requires understanding the distinction between spirit and emotion, as Molinos defines them.
Think of it this way. Your spirit, the deepest part of you, is pure spirit, the engine of the car.
Okay.
The spirit operates constantly, providing direction and torque. Your emotion, however, is the speedometer.
Just the readout.
It's just the sensory readout that fluctuates wildly based on road conditions, the weather, even just what you had for lunch that day.
That's a really helpful analogy. The spirit doesn't need the speedometer to be bouncing to confirm that it's running.
Not at all. Molinos emphasizes that the spirit does not need external feelings or even the full consciousness of the sensory apparatus to express its love or knowledge. The connection in the deep interior is often silent, subtle, and completely unfelt by the outer sensory self.
The goal is to live from the engine, not the speedometer.
That's it.
You know, I think the biggest struggle for our modern listener with this inner path is the time investment. It just feels like we're sitting around doing nothing when there's no immediate sensory payoff.
And Molinos addresses this perceived idleness with a powerful, almost shocking proverb.
Which is?
Not waiting is the only and greatest idleness.
Wow. That completely reframes the concept of productivity.
It does. What he means is that lacking dedicated time for the divine, not setting aside idle time to simply wait, is the greatest laziness a believer can possess.
Because it's prioritizing the immediate, visible, surface-level activities
over the profound, slow, and deep work of transformation. True spiritual industry is found in the stillness of waiting, not the frenzy of emotional activity.
So if we accept that this inner path is the correct one, the path of the strong will, what are the practical, actionable steps Molinos provides for navigating this quiet internal journey?
The guidance is focused entirely on reorienting the will, not generating feeling. First, commit your life to the Lord's guidance. This is a foundational, settled intellectual decision that has to be continually affirmed.
Okay, second, wait for him as light in dryness and darkness. Waiting is not passive resignation.
No, it's an active posture of expectation and submission, committing to the presence despite the perceived absence of light.
Third, follow internal promptings.
And you have to listen for those quiet, subtle internal nudges that are so distinct from the loud, often self-centered external feelings and passions. This requires silence and attention.
Fourth, accept divine influence deep within.
Which requires a deep internal surrender, acknowledging and yielding to the unseen, intangible work being performed on your spirit.
Fifth, and this is arguably the most difficult when feelings are absent, use the will to respect him. When feelings are gone, the will has to step up and become the primary organ of relationship. You choose respect, you choose reverence, you choose obedience, even if your heart feels completely cold.
And sixth, which is highly challenging for our analytical, idea-driven listeners.
Reject all distracting imagination, views, and concepts during prayer.
So don't use prayer time to construct mental pictures of the divine or wrestle with theological concepts. Exactly. Get rid of the mental clutter and the preconceived notions of what spiritual connection should look like. That last point is crucial. If you're constantly trying to conceptualize or define or analyze the divine, your intellect is stopping the direct, nonverbal work of the spirit. You have to enter the presence, simply, without your own mental definitions getting in the way. It's a radical call to mental simplicity and submission.
We've covered dryness pretty thoroughly, which is essentially the absence of sensory feeling. Now, Molinos addresses darkness.
And just like with the two pursuits, there are two types of darkness, and understanding the distinction is vital for persistence.
The first type is straightforward and familiar. Unpleasant darkness.
This darkness originates directly from sin. It leads to sorrow, remorse, and if it's unresolved, spiritual death. This is the darkness we actively seek to avoid through repentance and vigilance.
But the second type is the central paradox of this section. Joyful darkness. Why on earth would darkness be joyful?
Because the divine permits this darkness specifically to build true virtue. It is a strategic deployment of obscurity.
And the paradox deepens.
Because Molinos describes this darkness as joyful precisely because it illuminates and strengthens the inner spirit, leading eventually to a brighter light.
Yeah.
It's that classic idea of purification by fire. You have to go through the dark process to gain permanent illumination.
So Molinos instructs the listener, do not worry or feel abandoned when your path seems dark, or when you lose the previous comforting light.
He insists this temporary loss of light is absolutely not a loss.
Not a loss at all. If you lose a highly blessed or joyous previous feeling of connection, Molinos says you should see it as a signal. It's a sign that the divine is moving you off the easily visible path and further into the internal road where the real work can be done.
And while the surface appearance during this darkness may look like stagnation, Molinos says this period actually accelerates the believer toward the goal.
How is something that feels static actually accelerating progress? That's the question.
It accelerates progress because of what is being removed. The source highlights that true spiritual light, the solio, can only be encountered in the deep spirit when the light of the natural life is removed.
The theoio.
Your natural, self-centered understanding of reality and the divine has to be dimmed before the true internal illumination can take hold.
That is profound. Our ego's light is so bright, it blinds us to the true spiritual reality.
Precisely. If you are only using the rational, emotional, and sensory light of your natural life to navigate the spiritual path, you can never perceive the deepest realities. The darkness forces you to rely on a different, truer form of illumination.
So the purification process is intrinsically linked to the dark. True wisdom and strong love are generated when the sensory and rational pathways are intentionally obscured.
And here's the synthesis of everything we've talked about, tied directly to darkness. The natural life that egocentric self receives its fatal dealing, its soci, during the days of darkness, not in periods of external joy or spiritual comfort.
So the natural life, the ego, the feeling-based self, can only be overcome, can only be killed, when the light it loves, the attention and affirmation it seeks, is completely taken away.
Absolutely. This dark process purifies the imagination, the views, the fantasies that create a wrong understanding of the divine.
So dryness purifies the external senses.
And darkness purifies the internal conceptualization of the divine itself. If you think God is only found in ecstatic feelings, the darkness removes that misconception by forcing you to meet him through the will.
This sounds like a comprehensive system. It's not just discomfort. It's a strategically executed two-pronged purification designed to move the believer from external reliance to internal will-based maturity.
So given this powerful framework, dryness is essential purification, darkness is strategic acceleration. What is the final practical command from Molinos on how we should view and respond to this difficult period when it inevitably comes.
The command is simple and intense. Cherish and embrace them.
You all owe him.
These dry, dark experiences should be received as gifts, even if they feel like the heaviest burdens you've ever carried.
And the single most important foundational action the believer can take during this time.
Believe.
Just believe. You must use your will to believe that you are in his presence, even when every fiber of your external, sensory, and emotional being tells you he is distant, silent, or miles away. That belief is the rudder in the storm.
And this determination dictates the specific persistent strategies Molinos provides. First, continue sweetly, quietly, and focusedly coming before him.
No need for emotional dramatics, shouting, or forced enthusiasm.
Second, and this speaks directly to the listener who wants to intellectually solve their spiritual problems.
Do not exert effort to discover, understand, or struggle to find a way out of the darkness. Stop analyzing the purification process. Stop using your rational mind to try and light up a path that is intentionally dark.
The struggle to understand why you were in the desert is often the biggest distraction from simply being in the desert.
And the essential rule follows this. Do not stop coming before him. Molinos states you must maintain the exact same faithfulness during dryness and darkness as you did during times of blessing and spiritual abundance.
Your faithfulness should be based on your will and commitment, not your current emotional state.
The focus also needs a crucial shift. The text advises not to focus on seeking emotional love, the thei.
That's just seeking the return of the sensory experience.
Exactly. Instead, use your will to express the thirst, to follow his will and be his joy. If you can't generate the feeling of affection, generate the intention of obedience. That submission of will is the fuel that runs the inner path engine, regardless of the speedometer reading.
And what is the serious practical consequence if the believer refuses to follow this inner path? If they keep chasing the emotional high of the child stage?
Molinos' warning is clear and profound. Failure to follow this path leads to endlessly circling,
making no progress.
Terror toward the inner goal. They spend their entire lives recycling the natural feeling-based experiences without ever achieving the structural transformation we saw in those 13 fruits. They never truly mature beyond the spiritual nursery.
Because, ultimately, the final purpose is not an emotional experience with the divine. Molinos insists that constantly seeking emotional highs is not the ultimate purpose of the spiritual journey.
The purpose is transformation of character, purification of the ego, and alignment of the will. And dryness and darkness are the necessary purification tools to move beyond the sensory child and develop the strong, submitted adult spirit.
That was a powerful extraction of Molinos' desert path guidance. So let's try to summarize what we've unpacked here.
Let's do it.
The core takeaway is just profoundly counterintuitive. True, structural growth comes through scarcity, internal struggle, and the stripping away of comfort, not through external abundance or constant sensory joy.
The difficult, dry, and dark times are custom-tailored for the deepest purification work.
And here is the synthesis for you, the listener. The knowledge, character, and resilience gained from patiently navigating the dry season through the persistent use of your will is permanent. It changes your core identity.
In contrast, conviction gained solely from external excitement and intense feeling is temporary. It's dependent entirely on favorable circumstances, and it's easily lost the moment the feelings cease.
That was a deep dive indeed. So a final thought to leave you with. If Molinos insists that the natural life is only dealt its fatal dealing in darkness, then what parts of your current success, your daily rituals, or your most comfortable habits might actually be masking a necessary purification that needs to take place?
And what would you discover about your true internal engine if you made the radical choice to stop seeking the emotional highs and simply waited in the quiet persistence of the will?
For more spiritual resources, visit lokaken.ai.